We are now live.
Okay, welcome everyone. There are some, being in the middle of the summer, we have quorum issues tonight. There's 4 of us here tonight. If any one of us leaves and is not replaced by another committee meeting, we will lose quorum and the meeting will end for procedural rules. So keeping that in mind, come back. Keeping that in mind, I like the your background this time, by the way, Councillor Chappell. We just a heads up if you are going to leave. So we already know the Vice Chair, Councillor Kiley, is leaving in around an hour, and so am I. I have to go to work night shift tonight. So the Chair and Vice Chair will both be leaving at 6:25 or 6:30, and unless we get our 6th member, that will be the end of the meeting. That's all I have to say about that. Just be mindful of the time and we'll be efficient. And I see Councillor McLaren is here as well. So we'll begin the meeting. I'll call the meeting to order. So the first thing is to approve the agenda. So you'll see the agenda in your package, the usual setup with 4 items of business. I was going to propose a reordering of the agenda, minor change, moving item C to the beginning and item D to right after item A, because that's the hiring of the new, or the decision on the renewing of the contract of the auditor. That is a time-sensitive element. And item C, there is a deferral to be discussed, and if it passes, that would remove it from the agenda. So so what I'm basically proposing, if you're looking at your list, is that we go C, A, D, B instead of A, B, C, D. So C and then A and then D and then B. So moving C and D forward to the 1st and 3rd positions. That's what I propose. But if anyone else wants a different order, please, now is your chance to raise your hand and speak up. Seeing none, we will vote to approve the agenda with that order change. So it would go C, A, D, B. It's just a difference in the order that we deliberate. All those in favor?
Chair,
and a seconder, I'm sorry.
Sorry, you need a mover? Yeah, thanks.
Moved by Councillor Holland, seconded by Councillor Kiley. All those in favor? And that carries. So next we have to confirm the minutes from our last meeting. So that was June 11th. Need a mover from who was present at that meeting. Councillor Chappell, seconded by Councillor McLaren. Are there any errors or omissions or comments about the minutes? Seeing none, I will call the vote to receive the minutes. All those in favor? And that carries. Now we have disclosure of pecuniary interest. Nope, seeing none. There are no delegations, Mr. Clerk? No delegations?
No, there are not, Mr. Chair.
And any briefings?
No, there are not.
Okay, so that brings us to business. So the first item for business is business item C, because it would move forward. So that's repeal and replace demolition control bylaw number 87-177. Is there any way to get that on the screen for the participants? Or do you all have it in front of you? Here we go. Yeah, so item C. So there's a recommendation there. And we received 2 items of correspondence on the addendum. I don't know if you've all had a chance to read them, but after I read those items and after I read the report, I prepared a motion to defer, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Holland. So for that reason, I need the Vice Chair to take over proceedings. So Mr. Vice Chair, will you take the chair?
I do. I take the chair and recognize you.
Yes, so the clerk should have my motion to defer. And if he does, you can have it up on screen, please.
Yeah, here we see, so this is deferring item C. We have a mover and seconder. So we can have comments to time or place about deferral. And the deferral here is reading deferred to the next administrative policies meeting. And the justification is so that staff can further review the properties listed on section C and D of the former bylaw, consult with the members of the public who contacted the city about the matter. I believe that's referencing the correspondence Councillor Stroud just mentioned, and make further specific recommendations for the committee's consideration. So we have time, place, and actually we have intent, which is technically allowed by our bylaws. So any members of the committee wishing to comment? Councillor Stroud, I recognize you.
Just briefly, the italics there, I don't need to be there. That was just because of the way it came in 2 drafts. So it doesn't have any particular meaning. And the rationale was pretty self-evident. And the timeline is written in the motion that for the next meeting. But of course, staff, I also consulted with staff, and the staff member in charge of this item has confirmed that it is not time sensitive and that it could come to us as late as October. We have a special meeting in September and we have a regular meeting in October. It doesn't specify in the deferral which meeting it needs to come back to. It just says the next meeting. So I'm open to any suggestions.
Councillor Chappelle.
Yes, thank you, your chair, through your chair. With respect to the next special meeting that is scheduled, what is on the agenda for the special meeting for consideration? Let's see if this can be held in or defer to the following meeting.
Perhaps Mr. Thompson could answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. The special meeting was called to allow for the committee to give consideration to the review of the city's procurement bylaw. I will mention that in October, I believe the short-term rental licensing item is coming forward. So that is a fulsome agenda as well.
So
Councillor Chappelle.
hearing that, on live still, through your chair, hearing that, I would propose that we bring this item forward to the special meeting so that we do not, we have an opportunity to address it rather than waiting for the short-term rentals.
Thank you. I'll look to Councillor Stroud. Councillor Stroud, is that within the wording of your motion? Is that friendly?
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're doing what Councillor Chappelle is recommending. So the short-term, the special meeting is to consider the procurement bylaw, and the October regular meeting, we already know the short-term rental item will be there. So Councillor Chappelle is suggesting putting it on the September meeting, which is the special meeting, and I don't have any preference one way or the other. So if that's considered friendly, then I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I think it is. And Mr. Clerk, just can you please confirm that that is the order of how things are happening?
Yes, the procurement bylaw is coming forward in September. As of right now, rental issue is coming forward in October, as well as a few other items.
Perfect. With that said, and based on the comments of the mover and Councillor Chappelle, we'll take the next meeting and the motion to defer to mean the special meeting in September. Other comments from committee? Questions? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor? All those opposed? And it passes, and I'll yield the chair to Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Excellent. So the next item is now item A from the original business, which is the 2019 audited financial statements. There's a report from the CFO and City Treasurer. The recommendation is essentially to receive the Audit Findings report, the audited financial statements of the Corporation of the City of Kingston for the year ending December 31st, 2019. It is included in the report. And we have the Treasurer and CFO here to speak to us and can introduce the item. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everybody. I thought I'd just take a few minutes, and I know we're tight on time tonight, so we'll try to do a bit of an abbreviated version here so that we allow time for any questions as well. So I thought I would start off, and there's 3 or 4 things I would like to highlight on the audited financial statements. Hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at them, but just a couple things I'd like to go over. And then I'll turn it over to Lori Huber, the audit partner from KPMG. And Lori will go through the audit findings report and any of the other, anything else with respect to the actual audit that was carried out itself. So just a couple things to start with, just a reminder to everybody on the committee. So these financial statements are consolidated. So they do have all of the operations and the assets and liabilities of a number of the agencies and boards if they are owned or controlled by the city. So the operations do include the operations of DBIA, the library board, both housing corporations. You'll recall we started consolidated townhomes last year, as well as our proportionate share of Kingston, Frontenac, and Addington Public Health. So those results are all included within there. I thought I'll skip the audit report. I'll leave that for Ms. Huber. So I thought I would start with the statement of financial position, which is page 5 of the financial statements. I believe it's page 11 of the agenda. So this is our financial position, a snapshot at December 31st of 2019. We do continue to report a healthy position, and if you see right at the very bottom of the page, you'll see our total municipal equity, and that basically shows the resources that are controlled by the city at December 31st, 2019, and you see these are all in thousands of dollars. So we have gone up about $85 million. We're at about $1.4 billion in terms of our municipal equity. There is a statement farther on, which I will refer to quickly in a few minutes, that actually breaks that $1.4 billion down in terms of the various categories within the municipal equity. But I can say in terms of that increase of about $85 million, it's really made up of 2 things. If you think of what the municipality owns at the end of the day, about 30 million represents an increase in our capital reserve funds. So that's taking our total basically reserves and reserve funds. We've gone up about $30 million, which is in line with our long-term strategy that we are trying to build our reserve funds with the 1% capital, as well as other contributions to reduce our reliance over time on debt. So that is certainly aligned with that. The other component of that is about $50 million of net tangible capital assets. So that's our capital assets that are purchased or are built and are now in use sitting on the financial statement. So that's the majority of that increase. But as I said, we'll take a quick look at that when we get to that statement. Couple things on the statement of financial position I just wanted to draw to your attention. The very first line, cash and short-term investments, you'll see has gone from about 130 million to almost $190 million. There is a strategy there, and you'll see farther down, we have our long-term investments as well, which has stayed at about 138 million. It stayed fairly constant there. Our long-term investments are monies that we know that we don't need to draw on for about at least 7 years. So they are long-term monies that we're telling our investment agents, you can use a long-term investment strategy. And there are, because our reserve funds are building up, there is sometimes the ability to add some more money, take from the short term and put into that long term. We did not do that in 2019, even though we did see the cash balances building up. For a couple reasons, mainly one, because we were keeping an eye on the long-term rates. And frankly, we were getting some pretty good rates on the short term. And so we were finding it was better just to invest some of those monies in the shorter term. But probably more importantly, we wanted to start holding back a little bit of cash so that we had some flexibility with our liquidity in terms of monies that we were going to need for capital. So in particular, looking at both the John Counter Boulevard project as well as the Third Crossing project, some fairly large invoices that were starting to come through in 2019. And so we didn't want to lock funds up for 7 or more years, knowing that we were going to need some of those monies. So we've been pretty conservative in holding those. We will keep an eye on that in 2020, and we may actually move some of those monies over into the long term. The taxes receivable, you'll notice, has gone down. And I just wanted to clarify there. I know that's a number that council quite often is looking at. Our taxes receivable actually stayed fairly constant from last year to this year in terms of our outstanding balance. That decrease actually relates to an amount that we set aside in our allowance for unrecoverable amounts. And council may recall that when we brought you the Q4 report for 2019, we actually had increased that allowance and wrote off about $1 million worth of taxes. So that allowance is netted off of that balance. So that's where you see that. And that $1 million represented about $500,000 for some of the large retail assessments that you're probably tired of me talking about, because I think it's probably been about 5 years now that those have been in process with MPAC. And the last year or so, we've started to see some of those assessments getting cleared out. And we were seeing some write-offs that were larger than what we had allowed for. And so we wanted to build that up. And the other $500,000 we expect will actually be processed in 2020. That related to an assessed value. It came in as a supplementary assessment. We got the supplementary monies, but subsequent to that, MPAC actually reassessed it and dropped it down as well. So I just wanted to clarify in terms of that balance. The only other thing I want to point out is just the temporary loans. You'll see has gone from 60 million to 95 million. Those are the monies that we borrow on a short term from Infrastructure Ontario, basically our construction financing for our long-term debt. So once council has approved projects to be funded from debt, we actually do construction financing from IO on a temporary basis, which is what this balance is. And then we come back to council when we're actually going to permanentize that debt and actually turn it into a debenture. And we actually will be back in front of council sometime, I believe, in October. We are looking at locking in some of those debt issuances because the rates are so good right now. So we will have a report back on that. So that was it in terms of the statement of financial position. The consolidated statement of operations, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on. So that would be page 12 of the agenda. This, again, is a consolidated picture, but it does align fairly closely to what you would have seen in the Q4 operating report that we would have brought, I believe in June, we brought that to council. And I'll show you where that links up in the statement of municipal equity. But other than that, not too much here. The only thing I do want to point out is down at the bottom of the page, you will see something about 3 lines up called prior period adjustment and a reference to note 22. And I did want to just mention that to council. I believe we have that actually in the report as well. But you do see through the report, you'll see where we've restated the prior year numbers in a few places. And then we've included this note. This prior period adjustment relates to the decision of council a few years ago to include impost fees in the development charge regime. So in the past, our impost fees were actually charged under the Municipal Act and reported one way for accounting purposes. Development charges are actually reported a different way for accounting purposes. They actually don't form part of our municipal equity because they're monies that belong to the developers. So when we did the last background study, which was passed last fall by council, we had included the impost fees under that development charge regime, which meant we now have to change the way we report them. So for accounting purposes, it's treated almost like an error in that we're changing something different, almost like a change in accounting policy. And therefore we go back so that we have some comparable numbers. So we have gone back, we've changed the 2018 numbers for those transactions. And then we had to actually do a catch up from the start of 18 to get that money out of equity. So it's about $30 million of impost fees we've pulled out of municipal equity, and we actually show as deferred revenue on the statement of financial position. So you will see that referenced a few times going through. Just a couple more things then, looking at the consolidated schedule of municipal equity, which I believe would be page 14 of the agenda package. So this is the statement I was referencing earlier that breaks down the $1.4 billion. So you can see in terms of what makes that number up, the numbers at the top, the current fund surpluses that you see there, which are by each of the consolidated entities that are in with the statements. If you compare the general operating surplus number there, that number ties into what was reported to council in June on the Q4 operating report. So that's our link back to the information that's in that report. As I said, also within the municipal equity is the investment that we've made in our tangible capital assets. So that becomes part of the assets that council owns and manages at the end of the year. And then the reserves and reserve funds that are in there. And as I said, that's gone up about $30 million in terms of the balance of the various reserves and reserve funds, which are listed there. The only other thing, I guess two other small things that I wanted to just mention. So first of all, within the notes, I mentioned the prior period adjustment note, which is on page 43. So that'll give you lots of information on the adjustment we made with respect to the impost fees. Page 42 of the notes also includes note 21, which is a subsequent event note with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic. So under public sector accounting principles, we do have to disclose any events that arose subsequent to the financial statement date that potentially could cause changes either to our assets or liabilities or our operating results in the future if it's significant. So in working with the auditors, we felt this was significant. Most financial statements for 2019 have included some type of a subsequent event note in there, basically saying that it doesn't affect the current year that's being reported on. And at the point of the statements, we're not sure exactly what that's going to mean in terms of the subsequent year reporting, but it's identified as a note there. The last thing that I just wanted to mention was just to reference on the addendum that the clerk sent out later this afternoon. We did actually, when we were just doing a final review and preparation for the meeting, noticed a typo error on note 22, which I believe is page, I'm not sure, it might be page 42. It's not 44, I guess it is, page 44. And that's the prior period adjustment note. The very last line there had said annual surpluses restated. The numbers don't change, the numbers were correct, but that reference to that $61 million number should have said deferred revenue, not annual surplus. So it was just a typing error, but we wanted to get it fixed before the statements go to council and before they're actually approved and finalized. So that was distributed just late this afternoon. So I think with that, Mr. Chair, if you'd like to turn it over, I don't know if you want to open it for questions or if you'd like me to turn it over to Ms. Huber from KPMG.
I was just reminded by your final comment there that there was something on the addendum that we should have approved when we approved the agenda. We did not approve the addendum when we approved the agenda, so maybe we could do that now. Mr. Clerk, is that procedurally correct to approve the addendum at this point before we go any further?
Sure, that would be appropriate.
Okay, so when we needed a mover and a seconder to approve the addendum, which includes that typo that was just mentioned and the two items of correspondence from members of the public. Councillor Chappelle, so moved. Councillor Kiley. Are there any comments about the addendum? Okay, all those in favor of approving the addendum? Opposed, and that carries. Back to the item. We will now go to, I guess maybe we should go to questions for what the treasurer just said to us, and then we may have further questions once we hear from the auditor. So Councillor Kiley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One question quickly now for me, Ms. Kennedy, high level question. Sorry, I don't remember this from last year, but is it usual for this audit report to lump different services together? So for example, there was protective services or general government or social services, where it's not actually a breakdown of each, say, police and fire, etc. It's just one kind of bigger catchment. Is that a normal practice?
Yes, it normally is the practice for municipal statements. Those categories actually come from the financial information return, which is a document that we have to send to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs each year. So we actually use those as a breakdown. And so it's one of the reasons we do provide more detail for you in the Q4 operating report, so that you do see a little bit more detail. Yep.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Spell.
Yes, thank you through your chair. I'm just wondering why there are no write-downs on any of our assets. Some assets like transit, considering an asset, I can't see how such assets would be able to retain their value over an extended period of time. So, you know, we've added $30 million in assets, but I would have thought there would have been some write-downs on assets that get old, you know, physical infrastructure that I'm sure needs to be replaced. And why isn't there anything accounted for? My second question is, I know that the bridge is coming online and JCB is coming online, and these are committed expenses, but I can't find where we have a listing of all of our committed expenses in our financial reports.
Thanks, Councillor Chappelle. So first of all, in terms of the tangible capital assets, so the number that shows on the statement of financial position, so the $1.7 billion of tangible capital assets, that's actually a net book value. So those have been written down from cost. We actually do apply a depreciation to them. And so that's a net book value. So note 18 to the financial statements gives you a breakdown by type of asset, and it shows what the cost was, either to buy or to build, and then the accumulated amortization that's been put against those. So, and then that resulting number is actually a net number. The other thing that we do, and Ms. Huber may refer to this in her audit report, but we actually have another process when we're doing the year end, that we look at those net book values and to see whether they should be written down even more. So is there a reason that some of our assets are even less than what that depreciated value is? We didn't need to do any write downs on those this year, but it's certainly a process we look each year. That's required under public sector accounting principles to make sure that what you're showing that there is, that actually is a realistic and a realizable value on those. With respect to the committed expenses, so you normally in under financial reporting principles, you would not include your committed expenses. And I'm just trying to remember whether or not, because we actually do calculate committed expenses now on our system. So we actually have commitment accounting on the system. We're still working out a few bugs in terms of how that's working, but we've come a long way with the new system with that. I'm trying to recall, I don't believe it's something, and Ms. Folds is on the line. She might correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe we actually do show it on the quarterly report. I think we're just showing the actuals, but it is information we have. And once we get a few more of the bugs worked out on it, it's something we could certainly look at reporting to council. It wouldn't be on the audited statements, but it could be done separately on, say, the quarterly reports.
As a supplemental to that, I appreciate that. I do think it's important for the citizens of Kingston to know what their committed expenses are when they look at the budget. It's very important information that especially this year, I think is critical. The other aspect that I was concerned with is, you know what, it just slipped my mind completely. It's like the budget. It's, you know, it balances itself, I suppose. The aspect that I'm really concerned with is, I guess it leans on to what Councillor Kiley was mentioning. Because it's consolidated and grouped together, there's really no opportunity for council to understand the impacts of individual budgets. Like, we've got a homeless crisis in Kingston, and I think by having it consolidated, we can't see what milestones we're making. And similarly, we're getting hundreds of emails about police budgets. So it would be helpful to understand where we are with the police budget and how that breakdown is, which is one of the reasons why I've been arguing that we need a budget and audit committee for the city of Kingston, because there's no granularity for us to appreciate decisions that we make on council and impact. So we have a great big budget for transportation or a great big budget for public works. And then we have these trickle-in effects of having a new garbage truck or a new chassis. And you can't keep track of where those physical assets are unless you go line by line. And we don't have any of that information in front of us as councillors. It's all piecemeal in different reports that we don't get to see. So it's really, I would say, a mugs game. You got these shells moving around and you have no idea on how to get to a granular perspective on where we sit for the fiscal position. And I realize the budget is being presented as where we stand today, and we don't know the impacts of COVID-19. We don't know the impacts of all of our parking rates. We don't know how that's going to impact us going into the budget. Yet when we look at the cost for over $10 million increase in staffing budgets for 2019, well, how do we approach that next year? The staffing continues to grow. The 2-3% increase on staffing salary is a huge impact when the number is over $100 million in costs. So I would like to have greater granularity in these budgets. I know this is what we need to supplement and support the provincial requests, because they're looking at a global perspective based on the same categorization. And I appreciate the effort that goes into that. But I think for city council purposes, we need a little more granularity.
So thank you, Councillor Chappell, and I agree with a lot of what you just said there. I just want to remind the committee that what's on the table right now is the audited financial statements for 2019. So if, as Councillor Chappell was just saying, you want more detail or you want stuff broken down in with greater granularity or all those suggestions, that is something that is input that the CFO can take for the following year report. Also, it's important to note that this is not a budgetary session. We do have a separate budgetary process. And a lot of your points would be arguments in favor of expanding the budgetary process, having an audit committee, that kind of thing. So as chair of this committee, I have to just keep us on track for this particular recommendation, which is the report from KPMG, the audited financial statements for 2019. So those are the questions that are in order, and we will be hearing from KPMG, and they'll be able to give us some more detail. I will give the treasurer a chance to respond.
Yeah, just thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to respond. So yeah, certainly take those comments, and we can take a look at that. But what I can say, I would not recommend that detail be in the financial statements. I think that the financial statements play a different role, but we can certainly look at the monthly or the quarterly information that comes on operating and capital to council, as well as the even finer detail that we bring at budget time. So we can certainly take a look at that and where it would be appropriate to put that in. But I certainly wouldn't recommend that the audited financial statements would be the place to do that.
So now we'll go to the representative from KPMG. Keeping in mind it is now 6:03 and we have about 22 minutes left and 2 other items to deal with. So just keep that in mind, and we'll try to keep it brief from now on all members and all speakers. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. We're pleased to be here this evening to walk you through the very high-level overview of our audit findings report with respect to the 2019 financial year. My opening remark, perhaps for Ms. Kennedy, is to take a quick look at note 15E with respect to some outstanding capital commitments. And I think there's good information there with respect to one of the previous queries. So with respect to our own report, executive summary speaks to where we are with respect to the audit. So we were in front of this committee back in October 2019 to deliver our audit plan. And we are here tonight to walk through the highlights of our audit findings report. Certainly our audit findings does build upon our plan, and we have completed our audit in accordance with that plan. And certainly you will see through the balance of our report, we have addressed the impact of COVID-19, because that was certainly something that was new thrown at us in spring, early March 2020. And we've covered that off through the course of the audit as well. So where we are today with respect to the audit is we are largely complete. We will be able to release our audit report in final once council accepts and approves responsibility for the financial statements, which is slated for September 1. The only unique piece that's still outstanding to complete our audit file relates to 2 responses from our legal letters. It's ordinary and customary practice to write to legal firms to which the city engages in throughout the course of the year with respect to any ongoing legal matters. And those letters need to come back closer to the audit report date. So we'll stay on top of those and certainly work with the team to make sure that there's nothing significant that happens in the intervening period. Next page, on page number 2, the only thing really I would highlight here, just a reminder of our independence. So as the external auditors of the City of Kingston, we are required to maintain our independence. So to the extent we might provide any non-audit services to the city through the course of the year, we need to be mindful of those and make sure that there are adequate safeguards in place. And we've certainly done that again this year. And there's nothing from our perspective that causes any concern with respect to our independence. Flipping through, I will stop on page 4 of our report, which says audit risks and results continued at the very top of the page. This speaks to additional risk areas that we had identified through the course of our conversation as part of our audit plan with this committee back in the fall. Each and every year, we are required under Canadian auditing standards to incorporate an unpredictable procedure in the course of our audit process. And we've done that again this year. And certainly based on the conversations we had at this committee, we really did zone in on the procurement process in a couple of different areas. So you can see there with respect to our response and significant findings, we did test a number of procurements this year to assess compliance with the city's most current procurement policy. We also did test some expense reports of the leadership of the city to make sure that those were in compliance with city policies for travel and expense reimbursement. And we also tested a sample of corporate credit cards and their reconciliation to make sure that they were also in compliance with policy with the appropriate supporting documentation and reviews and approvals. So based on all of that work that we did do this year, that was a little bit new and unique, we have not identified any significant matters to bring to the attention of this committee. The other item on the page that follows speaks to critical accounting estimates within the financial statements. By and large, the largest accounting estimate on the balance sheet or the statement of financial position does speak to the employee future benefit obligations. The 2019 financial amount at the end of the year was just over 55 million. And from an audit perspective, we always zone in on estimates because by their very nature, they can be subject to judgment and or measurement uncertainty. So the employee future benefits is actually derived by a management expert. So they employ the work of an external actuary. And we rely on the work of that actuary as well. Fiscal 2019 was actually a full valuation year, which is required every 3 years. So from an audit perspective, we're also required to make sure that the data that the actuary is using is valid. So we've done that work again this year to make sure that the data going in is supported by the results coming out. And this year, the city did also employ a new actuary. So we made sure that we understood their professional competence and objectivity as well. So all of those things wrapped together, we believe that the process for estimating this liability at the end of the year is appropriate. Speaking to COVID-19, I think through Ms. Kennedy's presentation, I think she has done a great job summarizing the impact from a financial statement point of view. Certainly from an audit point of view, we developed a very extensive questionnaire in light of COVID-19 to really take a deep dive at a number of the financial statement captions on the balance sheet in particular to make sure, in light of the uncertainty and the economic impact of the pandemic, to make sure all of the assets and liabilities were appropriate. So we've done all of that work as well, and certainly no significant findings to report back. And with that, I will pass it over to Ms. Profit, who will take us through very quickly the balance of our report.
Thank you, Lori. So with respect to the technology in the audit, we're really continuing our journey to a data-enabled audit. So a couple of highlights from the plan tools and technologies in our audit plan. The first one is our client collaboration site, which is our secure platform for sharing information with management. And this proved exceptionally useful this year, given that the year-end audit work was performed completely remotely with our teams at their respective homes and management between the office and home as well. So it was a great time to bring that tool into use. We were also able to leverage some of our advanced capabilities to look at the grant revenue account. The matrix is on that following page, and perform a number of procedures around journal entries. And the results of those are summarized through the following slides, but at a high level, we did not identify any issues. And the purpose of using these tools is to give us comfort at analyzing the whole population, so all of the transactions within the year, and focus our testing on any of the outliers or exceptions. So no findings with bringing in those tools to the audit this year. And the last thing to highlight from this slide was a data and analytics routine we performed, where we looked at potential matches between vendor addresses in your procurement system and employee addresses in the payroll system. So based on those routines and those investigations, we did not identify any issues of concern through that work. So I'll jump to page 12 of our audit findings report, page 66 of the package. Just at a high level, the financial statements presented by the treasurer are, in our view, reflective of the accounting policies and practices under PSAP, and adequately describe the change in accounting policy with respect to that collection of development charges to fund the growth of the water and wastewater infrastructure. There were no new changes to the accounting standards framework for this year that impacted the city. And just to close off the matter around accounting estimates, aside from the employee future benefits presented by Lori, there are no other significant estimates. And when we look at other estimates in the financial statements, we did not identify any areas of possible management bias through our work and review of those estimates. And as noted on the following page and in our appendices, the future accounting standard that will impact the city relates to asset retirement obligations. It's a little bit down the road. It won't be in effect till fiscal 2023, but there will be a legwork leading up to that year end. And we've already begun those discussions with management and brought in one of our specialist partners within the past year to speak to what that standard will look like in the years to come. Continuing on to page 14, page 68. Through the audit, there were 3 other items we wanted to share with this committee. The first was the work that we performed around the accounting treatment for the restated balance. So we did look at the bylaw and the resulting restatement of the comparative information, and it did not modify our audit opinion, and the disclosures you saw in the financial statements are adequate in our perspective. This year, we conducted additional inquiries around cybersecurity, the entity level controls, given the current environment we're working in. And we are aware of the cybersecurity risk management policy that's in development, and have not identified any significant gaps in the cybersecurity protocols in place. And thirdly, our indirect tax partners had developed a municipal specific questionnaire to assess potential indicators of tax risk, and no immediate concerns were identified as we worked through that questionnaire. And management is continuing to work with KPMG and reviewing the HST collection on the municipal accommodation taxes. On the following page, going through our uncorrected differences and corrected adjustments. So the consolidated financial statements that were presented do reflect one adjustment that was identified throughout the course of the audit. The details are within the appendices, but at a high level, there was a $3.6 million adjustment recorded related to a December progress billing for the 3rd crossing. So it did not impact the statement of operations, but rather was an increase to the tangible capital assets and an increase to the accounts payable and accrued liabilities on the statement of financial position. So there were no other adjustments identified, either corrected or uncorrected through the audit. The purpose of the following page is just a reminder to the committee of the additional audit-related work that we perform for the city throughout the past year. So there was the additional work around the accounting standard change and the additional procedures to gain comfort over the COVID-19 impact, and then the number of other audit and review engagements that we perform for the city. And then our last page in the body here, we are required to communicate any significant deficiencies in internal control over the financial reporting process. And there have been none of those, certainly, to bring to the attention of this committee. So the balance of our report are our appendices that include some further reading on that accounting standard change for asset retirement obligations, some resources for the committee related to COVID-19. And there is one required communication, of course, that I'd love to speak to, and that's our independent auditors report. It's on page 20 or page 74 of the report. So this is our contribution to management's financial statement. So our report includes an unqualified or clean audit opinion for the year ended December 31st, 2019. You would see here that we have a new paragraph titled Emphasis of Matter for the comparative information that has been restated related to the water and wastewater DCs. And at the bottom of the second page, our audit report is dated September 1st, 2020. So upon Council's approval of the financial statements and our remaining subsequent event procedures, we would be prepared to finalize our audit report to be attached to the statements. So those are the highlights from our audit findings report. So certainly welcome any questions from the committee.
Thank you very much. Questions from members of the committee about the report? It's a very thorough presentation. It's all there. We've had some comments prior when the CFO spoke that perhaps could inform the next year's report. Clearly, it will be an interesting report a year from now because it will contain actual effect of the pandemic on the city finances. We'll see that in the 2020 report, so we'll look forward to that. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much. We'll move back to the committee for deliberations. So we need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation to get it on the floor. Moved by Councillor Chappelle, second by Councillor Kiley. You see it as item A. I won't read the whole thing, but essentially it's that this committee receive the report and the audit findings report, and that we recommend to council that council receive and approve the audited financial statements for 2019, which is in this report. So it's moved and seconded. Are there any comments? There are no, by the way, there are no members of the public present, so there's no need to go to that section. We'll just go to committee members for comments before we vote on the matter. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you very much. And I guess that concludes, with the conclusion of that item, the KPMG representatives do not need to remain in the meeting, I suppose, but you're welcome to follow along if you like. Next item to the agenda is item D, the appointment of auditor for a period of 3 years, 20 to 22, with an option of appointment for 2 additional years, 23 to 24. There's a report from the CFO and a recommendation. And I guess we'll let the CFO introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the report before you is a recommendation to appoint KPMG for a period of 3 years with an option for 2 additional years. So that will take us to the audit year 2024 with the 2-year option. We did do a request for proposal process. Council will recall we actually extended, I believe last year we extended for 1 year, actually on the request of Utilities Kingston for various reasons to extend one more year. So we did do a full RFP. KPMG was the only vendor that submitted on the proposal. There were actually 4 firms that actually took the proposal documents, because now that we do it electronically, we can see that information. But KPMG was the sole person that responded to that. And so we are recommending their appointment for at least the next 3 years.
Questions, and remember, this is questions only for members of the committee. Go ahead, Councillor Spell.
Thank you, through your chair. Is it possible to get a list of the companies that did respond, and were they local or were they external to the Bay Quinte, Brockville, Kingston?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So there was one other company that was, I would call, regional firm. So local and has offices regionally. There was one other national firm that I believe was out of, I think it was out of Ottawa. And then there was another one that was from down in the States. It wasn't even an auditing firm. So I'm not sure why they even took the documents. So they were more of a research type firm. So there was really just the 3.
This is a substantive contract, and I would hope that when we have our discussion on looking at purchasing items and services at our next meeting, that we actually have a department like yours to aggressively go out and actually have conversations with the parties who are local vendors who do these services. I have no questions or concerns with KPMG, but I do know that we do have other substantive organizations that may or may not have been aware. You can post it on a website, but in the chaos of everything that's happened, I think it's incumbent upon us as the city of Kingston to actually go directly to service providers in our community. And I do have a concern with that.
Ms. Treasurer?
Yes, so through you, Mr. Chair. So we actually did do that with this one. We actually reached out. So we had 5 firms when we did the RFP, which would have been in 2014. We actually had 5 firms that submitted. So we contacted each one of those firms. We also contacted a partner in all of the local firms. Not the one-man ones that we knew wouldn't have the resources to do it, but all of the other local firms were contacted to let them know that the RFP was out on the street and available for them to look at. I can certainly offer my thoughts on this in terms of why there was only one. In terms of resourcing, I would hesitate to say that there's probably maybe the other one other local one. It was a regional firm that would have enough resources to do the audit. So RFP includes Utilities Kingston as well. So it's Utilities Kingston, Kingston Hydro, City of Kingston, and the library, the DBIA. So it's a fairly large audit. And so I would say most of the local firms don't have the resources or don't have the expertise to do it, particularly on the utility side. Now, when we do the RFP, we do split it between city and utilities so that if there was a proponent that wanted to do one and not the other, they could actually propose that way. But I just think in terms of resources, there's probably nothing locally that could do that. I did have a discussion with one of the other firms and did confirm that they just did not have the resources, particularly when they look at, because they have a specialty in doing municipalities, we all have December year ends. And so that's a challenge too, because it's their busiest time. And so to add on something like the size of the City of Kingston. So I think that puts us to looking at the other national firms that would come out of either Toronto or Ottawa. And I would suggest that probably the challenge there, and I wasn't able to get a hold of the other one that came from Toronto, but I would say the challenge there is rates. So I do keep a very close eye and talk to my colleagues on what they're paying for audits. And I can tell you that we are not paying Toronto or Ottawa rates. We are paying Kingston rates. But with KPMG, we get access to national resources. So we kind of get the best of both worlds that way. And I would suggest for another national firm to come in, and they have either Toronto or Ottawa rates, which are more expensive, and they have travel. And have to come and stay and that kind of thing, it's going to put the cost up for them. And I guess if I was in their shoes and used to be doing this for a living, I would say that there's no way I could match a national firm that had a local office there. So that's just my take on it. And we certainly did do a lot of follow-up to find out why didn't we get anybody else and what was the situation. And I think, it is certainly something that when we think about what we ended up with at the end of the day, we know we have a very fair fee. KPMG has only increased it by 2% from what they've charged us for the 2019 audit, and they've actually held it at that for 2 years. So 20 and 21 will be the same fee. So I think we've got a very, very fair fee. And as you say, we've been very happy with KPMG, but I would say the other advantage we have is we have access to national resources. If they don't have the expertise here in Kingston for something other than audit, we've got access to that elsewhere right across the nation. So just give you a little bit of background from some of the research that I've done the last couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of the committee? Remember that if you've got comments about the process, wait till it's on the floor and it's your turn to make comments. We've just lost Councillor Kiley, and I have 5 minutes left before I have to change into my uniform and go to the hospital. So any other questions? None. We need to move and second the recommendation to get it on the floor. Moved by Councillor Spell, second by Councillor Holland. See, the recommendation has 4 clauses. It's essentially that we recommend that KPMG be the auditor. And you'll see the 4 clauses there in the package. The dates are 20 to 22. That's 3 years, 20, 21, and 22, with an option of adding years 4 and 5, which would be 23 and 24. There's some delegated authority clauses there and a draft bylaw clause. It's all up on the screen. So any deliberations on the recommendation? Seeing none, I will call the question on the recommendation on, I guess, all 5 clauses, the introductory clause and the other 4 clauses. All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Now we move on to the Rideau Crest. That's item B. We need to move into the Board of Management. I can linger a little bit longer if you don't mind me being off screen while I change into my uniform. I can still be present and listening to the members of the committee and to the presentation. But we need a mover and seconder to move into committee. Yes, moved by Councillor Holland, seconded by Councillor McLaren, that we resolve into the Board of Management for Rideau Crest. All those in favor? Opposed? So we're now the Board of Management. I see Keys is here to tell us about this report, and I'll give you the floor, and I will be listening as I change into my uniform. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening. I'll just keep this brief for my summary, just being cautious of time, and if we do lose Councillor Stroud, then we won't be able to remain. So this is the second report that's provided to the Rideau Crest Board of Management for 2020, and this report contains information from May through to the end of June of this year. Rideau Crest Home had 3 incidents reportable to the Ministry of Long-Term Care for these months. There were no written complaints that the home was mandated to report over the course of this time period. The Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care was in the home June 23rd, 24th, and 26th. During the course of this inspection, the compliance officers reviewed 3 critical incidents reported by the home, as well as 2 complaints reported by a resident. The home has not yet received the inspection report. As of June 2020, there were 458 people on the waiting list for the home. 264 of those are actively seeking or requiring admission to long-term care, of which 50 are in crisis awaiting placements at this time. As of the end of June, Rideau Crest has spent 48.81% of its municipal contributions, excluding commitments, which is $96,000 under budget. The Premier announced in April that the province would be providing temporary pandemic pay for long-term care frontline and support workers. Rideau Crest has implemented this pay premium for all eligible employees in June, and we continue this through to the 13th of August mandate. Reader Crest received the initial payment of $508,000 from the province in June, which represents 75% of this funding. We then received the final 25% of that funding in July. Reader Crest continues to work very closely with Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, our local health integration network, and our local public health unit to ensure the safety and security of the residents and our staff related to the COVID-19 pandemic. As of the end of June, the home has not reported any positive cases of COVID-19 in staff or residents. The home will continue to complete home-wide staff swabbing of all staff every 2 weeks until further notice. We've been doing this since the beginning of June and one time in May. As well, we will continue to test all symptomatic staff and residents, and they will remain isolated until a negative swab is obtained and they are symptom-free. As of March 13th, all visiting to the home outside of those deemed essential were restricted by the province. The home did begin outdoor visits with residents and families on the 22nd of June, as allowed by the province. And as part of that implementation, we had to ensure extreme infection prevention and control measures were in place in order to safely execute those visits. We then, starting on the 22nd of July, have implemented indoor visits for families and residents, and we do continue with that now. The home continues to work with city staff, home staff, and families to ensure that all plans and preparations are in place for what we're expecting to be the second wave of COVID-19 coming in this fall. And also in the preparation if we need to, in fact, declare an outbreak as a result of this. As of the end of June, the home has received $121,000 in emergency COVID-19 provincial funding. This funding supports the cost of increased supplies, screening costs, and other incremental pandemic expenses. As of the end of June, the home had utilized $92,000 of this funding. The home has also received a final lump sum funding initial one-time payment of $46,000 in July. So the beginning of July, this left us with $75,000 to utilize for any future costs that we may have in terms of pandemic supplies. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Go ahead, Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for Ms. Keys. I'm curious about, so the funding, the extra emergency funding from the province, does it cover any extra costs associated with visitations? And do you see, I think really what I'm getting at is, will we be able to continue to maintain and expand upon visitation? Or is there a staff capacity issue?
Thank you. So it does help with the costs of visitation. For indoor visits, we are providing masks for families and those that are coming in to visit. It also is helping subsidize the cost of the screeners. So we're mandated to have a screener at the front of our building for every staff member or family visitor contracted service that comes through the door, as well as having a screener outside where we are doing our outdoor visits with residents and families. We're encouraging families to bring face coverings for outdoor visits, but in the event they don't have those, we are supplying masks for them in those cases. We are looking to move forward starting next week with essential caregivers, which is a new term, which is we're anticipating to see a number of families who will be able to come in and provide hands-on care or emotional care to help support the residents and the families through this, what has been a very traumatic 4 months.
You have one ready.
They will also be required to wear full PPE during those times. So that will help cover that cost. $75,000 seems like a lot, but when we're spending that much on supplies, we're hopeful that we'll be able to get through to the end of the year. If we don't have to declare an outbreak at this time, but we can reconcile this at the end of the year to try and get any monies back that we don't, that we are spending that we haven't received from the province to date.
Thank you.
I'd like to just make a comment. I'm impressed that you were able to distribute the pandemic pay as announced by the Ford government for your staff, because I know that my employer has not yet done so. So good job. They promised it by the end of the month, but you're ahead of the game in that sense, and that's very good. I'm very encouraged by your report on the year so far, and thank you. Any other questions from members of the board? Okay, so we have the report. It is information only. It was an opportunity to ask questions and it's now public record. Seeing no further questions, we will then resolve back to out of the Board of Management. So I need a mover and seconder for that. Moved by Councillor McLaren, second by Councillor Chappelle, that we rise from the Board of Management of Rideau Crest Home. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. That is the end of the business. So then we go to motions or notices of motion. Is there any other business? Seeing none. The correspondence was on the addendum. There are 2 items. There is our next meeting. There's a special meeting on September 9th, and then our next regular meeting is October 8th. And I need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Chappelle, Councillor McLaren, all those in favor? Thank you very much. Sorry, mustache. Goodbye.